What's up everyone? Alex here. Caligula Effect 2 has one of the most unique turn-based battle systems to date, and with so many things to keep track of, it might be challenging to find out what things to focus on first. In this video, I'll not only help you figure out what aspects of combat you'll need to pay attention to, but also provide you with the fundamental building blocks to create your own devastating combos. I've provided chapter breaks throughout this video for your convenience, and you'll find them in the description below. To understand how this all works, we'll need to quickly touch upon what happens during your turn, as things work out a little differently than other turn-based RPGs. The first two phases of your turn should be familiar to you, especially if you're a fan of turn-based RPGs, selecting an action, then selecting your target. I should point out that you're able to take as long as you want during your turn, as time pauses while this is happening. We'll call the time when all your actions take place combat time, for clarity's sake. Pretty straightforward so far, right? The next and final phase of your turn is what makes Caligula Effect 2 unique, which I call the simulation phase. In this phase, you'll watch a simulation of what's about to happen in combat time if your selected action is executed immediately. It's also here that you're able to delay your action, which is especially helpful when trying to juggle enemies. In order to initiate these juggles, you will need to counter enemies, which is one of the fundamental building blocks of Caligula Effect 2's combat. Juggling also increases the enemy's risk gauge faster, and when they're maxed out, you'll inflict even more damage. The game's tutorials cover this fairly well, but just in case you need a refresher, you'll need to counter labeled actions with the appropriate attacks. There are 3 different labeled actions that you'll need to keep an eye out for: melee, ranged, and guard. Abilities marked with melee counter, ranged counter, and guard break counter the mentioned actions respectively, and will immediately put the enemy in a juggle state once they connect. What makes this more challenging, and in most cases time-consuming, is the other building block of Caligula Effect 2's combat: timing. We'll have to break down the different parts of an action to better understand this. Every action in Caligula Effect 2 consists of 3 parts, which might sound familiar to fighting game fans: startup, active, and recovery frames. Startup frames represent the delay cost that said action will have to incur. Startup frames are important because they'll determine how soon your attacks can come out. Active frames represent when the actual action occurs, which includes any necessary movement your character needs to do in order to execute it. If the action you selected is an attack, you'll also see white dots that represent when each hit actually activates. And recovery frames represent the delay cost of having executed the action. You're susceptible to attacks during this time and can't do anything, so pay attention to what happens while in the simulation phase to make sure your characters are protected. Now that we know when your attacks actually activate, it's time to set up your combos. And it all begins with the all-important counter juggle. In order to successfully counter an enemy, you'll have to hit them after their labeled action displays on screen. You'll be able to counter them until their action fully executes, so you've got ample time to get that counter hit in. Once you've confirmed the counter hit and sent your opponent flying in the simulation phase, it's time to commit the action and wait for the next party member. Once you've gained control of said party member, select an attack and then the juggle target. Each timeline is divided into 4 different measures, so use these guides to help adjust your timing. If the action that initiated the juggle has follow-up hits and is ground-based, you can try and time your hits around the follow-up attacks, though this could potentially make previously committed hits miss. Further in the game, you'll get characters with attacks that are powered up when attacking enemies on the ground, or ones that automatically home in on enemies while they're in midair. So keep that in mind when thinking about how to follow up. You'll eventually unlock the ability to activate Voltage, which is a super helpful ability. Upon activating Voltage, you'll not only get battle buffs, but your party will be able to take their turns immediately. Use this whenever you want to continue an important juggle, or if you feel that several of your party members are at a disadvantageous position on the field. We've covered a lot of info, so let's recap. There are 3 phases to a turn. The first 2 phases are typical for turn-based RPGs. Select an action, then select a target. The third and final phase is the simulation phase. This lets you preview what's about to happen during combat time. This also lets you delay your action to help time your attacks. Juggling increases the enemy's risk gauge faster. A maxed out risk means you'll inflict a ton more damage. Juggling is initiated through a successful counterattack. Choosing the counter that corresponds to that enemy's labeled attack will juggle them. For example, enemies with a melee action label can be countered by actions with melee counter. Actions have 3 different parts. Startup frames represent the delay before actually starting the action. Active frames represent when the action executes. And if the action is an attack, white dots will appear in active frames, representing when each hit activates. Recovery frames represent the delay after successfully executing the action. You can counter an enemy at any time between when the action label displays and when the action triggers. A timeline is divided into 4 measures. Use the measures to help set up each party member's follow-up attacks. If the action that initiated the juggle has follow-up hits and is ground-based, you can time another party member's follow-up attacks to match the follow-up hits of that particular attack, although this could potentially make previously committed hits miss. You'll eventually get attacks that power up depending on the enemy state, which can be down on the ground or in midair. Voltage is super helpful to further extend important juggles or to let you move your party out of dangerous situations. Now that you've learned the fundamentals, here's some tips to help you during combat. Acquaint yourself with the battle system and new characters by playing through several battles and learning what their abilities do. Once you feel comfortable enough with both, use auto battle to get through enemies that match your party's levels quickly. Whenever a fight begins, select an attack and a random target just to get into the simulation phase. Quickly identify what enemies need to be countered so you'll be able to think of how you're going to set up your party to counter them. As a general rule, it's better to counter as many enemies as possible so they'll lose their turn due to juggling. Gin's range attacks serve as the perfect follow-ups for any juggle. Later in the game, use Gin's attacks to extend juggles. Ranged attacks will miss after enemies are juggled to a certain height, so consider that while juggling. Be careful when using Sasara's Do Unto Others. This forces any damage that party members incur within this barrier to be inflicted on Sasara herself, and if multiple characters are damaged at the same time, she can die instantly. If you're trying to dodge a melee attack, delay your move action so that your opponent's attack will activate shortly after your character has just started moving. In these instances, I found it best to try and run to the opposite direction of where they're facing. When facing a ranged attacker that does a circular AoE around them and you can't move in time, use block even if you take damage. This ensures that you're still grounded and you don't lose a turn due to being juggled. And there you have it, Caligula Effect 2's combat, explained and broken down. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to post it in the comments below. If you're playing through Caligula Effect 2 and have some tips yourself, post those in the comments as well. And in case updates to this video are needed, I'll post them as a pinned comment. I hope this video helps you enjoy the game's combat even more, and if there's anything I can help clear up, I'll most certainly try to answer your questions in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.